Trying to perform at a high level with a dysregulated nervous system is like trying to drive a Ferrari with the emergency brake partially engaged. Yeah, you can still move forward. You can still produce results, but it requires dramatically more effort, creates significantly more wear and tear, and eventually something is going to burn out. Look, from the outside, your life probably looks successful. You're producing, you're having an impact, you're making money, you're leading, you're building, you're creating, you're handling pressure, you're putting out fires, you're solving problems. But internally, your mind rarely shuts off. You wake up already thinking. You struggle to slow down. You feel guilty resting, playing, doing nothing. Your body is exhausted, yet your brain is moving faster, always on, always racing. You're just constantly on, constantly anticipating, constantly carrying this pressure, this backpack of emotions that resides on your back, only growing heavier, heavier, and heavier. And perhaps what's most frustrating of all, you know this, and you know just how capable you are. Yet, despite all of your ambition, your intelligence, your discipline, and your work ethic, you still find yourself overthinking decisions, reacting emotionally under pressure, struggling to be fully present, not just with your team, but with your wife, your kids. You constantly find yourself on edge, short, impatient. You lose clarity the moment you need it most. And it's almost as if you need constant stimulation to avoid slowing down. Here's the truth that most high-performing individuals never realize. The same nervous patterns that helped you build your current level of success are often the exact same patterns preventing you from experiencing more peace, consistency, and fulfillment, as well as next level success. Because you cannot build an elite life from a chronically dysregulated nervous system. And the highest performing people in the world, they understand something that most people never learn. Emotional mastery is not suppressing emotion. It's learning how to regulate your nervous system so emotions don't hijack your clarity, decisions, relationships, and your ability to execute when you need to most. And that is exactly what we're going to dive into and discuss on today's podcast conversation. Welcome back. So thrilled you're here, tuning into another episode of the Unstuck High Performer podcast. This is the show for the high performer who knows they're capable of more, but feels stuck, underperforming relative to their potential. This is the show for successful people who know what to do, but still aren't consistently doing it. My name is Paul Salter. I'm your host, a high-performance hypnotherapist and mindset coach, and I specifically help CEOs, top-level executives, entrepreneurs, and ambitious professionals just like you get unstuck and out of your own way so you can lock in and level up. The core theme of today's conversation, and what I really want you to take away, is that your next level of success is not going to come from forcing more, grinding harder, or staying constantly wired or on all of the time. At some point, sustaining this current level of success or ascending to the next level is going to demand that you learn how to regulate your emotions and regulate your nervous system. It's going to require having the ability to slow down, stabilize your emotions, to remain clear, grounded, connected to your highest self. Now, the goal isn't to eliminate stress. It isn't to eliminate emotion. The goal is to build a nervous system that is strong enough so that pressure, challenge, they no longer hijack the best parts of who you are. And ultimately, underneath that, the goal is to build a nervous system that continuously feels safe, expanding to one level of success after the next. And I want to tell you a story to really illustrate just how impactful, how hindering a dysregulated nervous system can be on your goals, dreams, and desires. A client of mine was a successful CEO of a digital marketing agency and ad company. And in addition to being at the helm of this thriving, fast-paced growing business, she was also taking the lead on starting and overseeing the development of a nonprofit. As you can imagine, these two entities in themselves, quite draining, demanding a lot of her time, a lot of her energy, demanding her to be at her best. In addition to these two priorities, she was an incredibly committed and devoted wife, as well as a mother of two children. And as she took on this nonprofit endeavor at a time where her primary business was growing, not without challenges, of course, we began to see several health-related challenges begin to come to fruition because my client was burning the candle at both ends. She was working 14, 15-hour days. She was up early, immediately diving into her phone, her email, her Slack messages, and she was up late, clearing her inbox, figuring out what to do the next day, and attempting to get back to the messages she had left unread from the day or even the past few days prior. She was always on, always on. Yet candidly, this is what allowed her to get her primary business in a position to where it is today, where it didn't actually need her to be on, to be present, to have her finger on the pulse of every moving entity, though she chose to keep it that way. It did also allow her to have the opportunity to start and take the lead in this nonprofit. You see, she had a tenacity. She had an ambition, a commitment, a vision that very few can match. But it was that same commitment, that same tenacity that kept her stuck, always on, struggling to slow down, addicted to checking her phone, making email and Slack messages her priority the first thing in the morning. And what we ended up noticing and observing, there were a few years in which health-wise, something was always wrong. She tore her meniscus and her ACL twice in an 18-month period of time. She was diagnosed with Lyme's disease. She had to have a parathyroid gland removed. She had hypothyroidism. Her weight was up 30 pounds and then down 40 pounds, up 30 pounds, then down 20 pounds, a never-ending yo-yo dieting cycle. And as you can imagine, these health complications begin to weigh on her, began to slow her down. One surgery after the next. Unable to rest, the first thing she'd do after surgery was ask for her phone, ask for her computer. She was always on. Truthfully, it's because that's all she knew. And where it really started to hinder her ability to work effectively was in taking her nonprofit to the next level. You see, taking her nonprofit to the next level demanded donor money. She needed outside funding in order to take this idea to the next level, which required her to build partnerships with local hospitals and medical organizations to get the funding to match. Ultimately, what she was doing was matching those in need of a kidney with donors and partnering with medical programs and hospitals across the country. And in order to secure additional funding, she needed to have conversations with wealthy individuals. And stereotypically speaking, her reality happened to be that most of these conversations were with perceived powerful older men. And in having a series of these conversations early on, what she began to notice was as if the conversation was over in the blink of an eye. It was blurry. It was like she had dissociated and boom, just like that, it was over. She struggled to articulate her vision. She struggled to clearly ask for what she needed. She lacked confidence. She showed up nervous, anxious, playing small, a shell of herself. And it was beginning to take a toll, not just on the potential growth of this business, but a toll on her emotional well-being, her confidence, her security, her trust, her conviction. It led to overwhelm, second-guessing, uncertainty, anxiety, fear, worry. And this was in addition to the crippling health circumstance she was already navigating. And on the outside, me, having the opportunity to look at this from a 30,000-foot view, not being so close to the situation, it was quite obvious what was happening. She was trying to solve all of the problems that she had placed on her plate by doing more, remaining on, always going, always thinking, always doing. She was fueled by a dysregulated nervous system, a nervous system that did not feel safe turning off, slowing down, taking a breather. She had learned through her experiences that safety was always doing, always going, more, more, more. And eventually, she reached a point where she was no longer operating from a vision-driven place. She was operating from a need to do. She found security in doing. She found threat, danger in being. Now, fortunately for my client, she had the courage to ask for help. She was going through this significant period of struggle. And had she not chosen to ask for help, to invest in herself, to bring in coaching, who knows what road she might have ended up down. And fortunately, in this case, we had the opportunity to retrain her nervous system, to create safety so that she could have a repair done on her knee or a follow-up procedure and then take 5 to 7 days completely off, removed from work, and come back to the office feeling refreshed, reset, recharged. But what we really did was train her nervous system, create a newfound sense of safety in speaking up, in trusting herself, finding her voice, leading with confidence in those conversations with the potential donors that she needed funding for to take her nonprofit to the next level. And you hear just this undercurrent of nervous system dysregulation in the story I've shared so far. But the one missing piece you've yet to hear, because I've yet to share, is that all of these patterns of dysregulation, addicted to email, Slack, struggling to sleep, always on, trying to problem solve by doing more, this was ingrained in her from a very young age, because this same client bounced from one foster care home the next the majority of her childhood. And typically the reason she would bounce from one to the next was, unfortunately, she was the victim of some form of abuse. Physical, emotional, verbal abuse ran rampant in her story. And more often than not, who was the abuser? A perceived powerful older male. She learned, as a way to protect herself, that the only way to minimize or once in a while avoid any form of verbal, physical, or emotional abuse was by playing small, not saying anything, not speaking up, not sharing her opinion or her feelings. And that same little girl is the version of her who would show up in these high stakes negotiations where the goal was to secure significant funding. As you can imagine, that little girl was not capable, didn't have the skills, the intelligence, the awareness, emotional intelligence, that is, to navigate these conversations. And it wasn't until we created a sense of safety in speaking up. We created a sense of safety in slowing down, a sense of safety connecting with her best self, a sense of safety expanding to the next level of success, that she was able to walk into that room, speak with clarity, composure, conviction, and confidence. Because once she was able to do that, the funding came in. Millions of dollars to take her nonprofit to the next level, to have a significantly bigger impact, literally changing and saving the lives of so many. None of that would have been possible if she didn't take the necessary action steps to begin regulating her nervous system, creating safety and slowing down. And if you're listening right now and you're resonating with this, I have an imagination that you struggle first thing in the morning. The first thing you do in the morning is you check your phone. And you've become incredibly talented at numbing, repressing, or avoiding your emotions, to the point that if I were to ask you right now, what are you feeling? You'd be unable to label, unable to name what it is you're feeling. Short, shallow, rapid breathing, specifically breathing through your mouth, is your default. You don't know any other way. And when I suggest to you that that is a sign you are stuck in fight or flight, you are wired, you are turned on, there's an unnecessary amount of adrenaline coursing through your veins right now, you see it as a badge of honor. Your nervous system is dysregulated if you feel guilty resting. You feel anxious when you force yourself to take a day off, or maybe your wife demands no work, no email today, just be present with us and the kids. That creates more anxiety, more restlessness. And as a result, you're irritable, you're impatient. You're not fun to be around. You mindlessly scarf down your meals in a matter of minutes. You switch endlessly from one task to the next. You struggle to say no. And when it's finally time, or you've convinced yourself to shut your eyes and go to sleep for the night, even though you're physically exhausted, emotionally worn, you struggle to turn your mind off. It's like your mind is just waking up, getting started, and you move 1,000,000 miles an hour. Listen, if it feels unsafe to slow down and stop, if you feel anxious, guilty when you're not working, that's a sign you are dysregulated. You are off track. And although this may have helped you achieve the current level of success you have, it will not help you sustain it, and it will not be what takes you to the next level. Your nervous system's primary job, we got to do a little education here. It's not happiness, it's not success, it's not confidence, it's not productivity. Your nervous system's job is survival and protection. And the way you can think about your nervous system is essentially it's your body's command center and internal surveillance system. It's constantly scanning your environment, your thoughts, your emotions, your experiences, your relationships to answer one simple question. Am I safe right now? And based on the answer to that question, after scanning and analyzing billions of bits of information, that answer ultimately influences your emotions, your energy, your stress response, your focus, your decisiveness, your reactions, your breathing, your heart rate, your tension, your sleep, your digestion, your overall sense of calm and urgency. And a simpler way to think about your nervous system is it's basically the communication network between your brain and your body that determines whether you operate from a state of safety and regulation or survival and protection. I need you to hear that. You're either operating from a place of calm and safety, or you're operating as if you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, trying to survive, trying to protect yourself. And what's interesting here that most people miss is that your nervous system does not only respond to the obvious signs of danger, the obvious physical threats. Your nervous system picks up on everything your subconscious picks up on, every piece of communication that's being communicated or transmitted beneath conscious awareness. Your nervous system responds to uncertainty, rejection, failure, criticism, pressure, overwhelm, emotional pain, feelings of embarrassment, guilt, shame, exposure. And this becomes incredibly important because when your nervous system perceives a threat, physical, emotional, real, or perceived, it immediately shifts from a state of regulation and flexibility into survival mode. This activates what you have likely come to know as your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight response. Or in extreme cases, it might shut you down. You might freeze, be locked, paralyzed in a state of inaction. And your body immediately begins reallocating energy away from long-term thinking, away from the critical logical parts of your brain, and shifting immediately towards survival and accessing, or rather bringing online, all of the emotional decision-making in your brain. So physiologically, your new default becomes increased cortisol and adrenaline coursing through your veins, an elevated heart rate, shallow, faster breathing, a baseline of muscle tension and tightness, difficulty or reduced digestion, increased vigilance. You're just always on. You're emotionally fragile. Yeah. Your propensity to avoid and repress emotions, to try to outwork and do more to solve every problem, has created a state in which you have become emotionally fragile. And this is why dysregulated people are so prone to overreacting, catastrophizing, struggling to focus, making impulsive decisions. They numb out. They seek to avoid, procrastinate. They feel exhausted, yet they're unable to rest, unable to shut off because their biology, their nervous system has literally shifted into survival mode. A dysregulated nervous system is a state in which your body perceives stress, pressure, uncertainty, failure, overwhelm as a threat. And as a result, begins pulling you into a survival-based collection of patterns. You ultimately begin losing access to the best parts of yourself. Your thinking narrows, your emotional reactivity rises, your patience shrinks, and your behaviors inevitably become impulsive, avoidant, rigid, scattered, defensive, and emotionally charged. As you're listening to what I'm sharing, you heard of some of the ailments, the signs, the symptoms that my client was experiencing. I'm curious, are you operating from a dysregulated nervous system or a regulated nervous system? Because a regulated nervous system is a state in which your mind and body feel safe enough to think clearly, respond rationally, recover quickly, and stay emotionally flexible under pressure. It means you can experience pressure, stress, uncertainty, rejection, intensity without becoming overly consumed, reactive, impulsive, or emotionally hijacked. A regulated high performer can feel pressure without losing access to their clarity, their intuition, their logical decision making, their discipline, their presence, and their self-trust. Are you regulated right now? Are you able to access a state of calm, a state of composure, a state of clarity? Again, trying to perform at a high level with a dysregulated nervous system is like trying to drive a Ferrari with the emergency brake partially engaged. Yes, you can still move forward. Yes, you can still produce results, but it requires dramatically more effort, creates significantly more wear and tear, and eventually something burns out. And again, I always come back to this concept of leaking energy. If you have a dysregulated nervous system, you're stuck in this fight or flight, you're always on, you find difficulty in disconnecting from your work, difficulty in turning off, slowing down, and being. Because you are always on, being always on demands energy. And both you and I wake up every day with a finite amount of energy. And if you're always on, you're radically and rapidly depleting your limited energy supply just to help you remain on. So, as a result, when it's time to make decisions, when it's time to analyze information, when it's time to hold space, when it's time to lead, when it's time to have that difficult conversation, you are forcing yourself to do so while operating at an energy deficit because you have expended a significant amount of energy remaining always on, wired, going, doing. And as I alluded to in the beginning of this conversation and mentioned in my client's story, this might feel familiar, even comfortable. Therefore, it's predictable, repeatable, and safe. Remember, your subconscious has one primary objective, and that's to keep you safe. And a cocktail for safety is familiarity, predictability, and comfortability. Always being on may be all you know. And again, it is likely one of the biggest influential reasons for your current success. It will also prove to be one of the most influential reasons of your demise if you do not learn to regain control and regulate your nervous system. A client of mine is the owner-operator of a restaurant. He's a husband, and he's a father of three. Three, at one point, who are under three. Needless to say, it's safe to say he has his hands full. And when he first reached out to me, he was struggling mightily. He was in the restaurant usually by 6 every single morning. And although he was home by 4, not the most demanding schedule, it was also a job and a role he didn't want. You see, he had taken over his father's restaurant. This was the family restaurant that he grew up in, and feeling lost and uncertain about his own career trajectory after college and having a few early gigs not work out the way he imagined, he decided to step in and help out in the family restaurant. And turns out he was good at what he did. Mom and dad were eventually looking to retire. They needed someone to take over, and he began to fill that void. Not because he wanted to, but he felt guilty. He felt like he had to. It's what was expected of him. So I point that out just to simply highlight there's already a misalignment, some incongruency present. He's not doing what he wants to be doing. But he's seen how hard his parents worked to create this restaurant over the years. They were always working. So many of his childhood memories were in that restaurant, whether it be working for his parents or actually eating meals, enjoying time with family there. He was always working. His parents were always working. This was just what he absorbed and observed from a young age. But we come back to the present moment of when him and I first began working together. What he was struggling with was when he would get home from a long, exhaustive day of doing something he didn't enjoy and want to be doing. Despite the good money, despite the good local status, the role he played in the community, he'd get home and find himself incredibly short-tempered, raising his voice, yelling, impatient, resentful, guilty. And he was stuck in this never-ending cycle. He'd get home, he'd lose his patience quickly, he'd raise his voice, he'd yell at his kids, he'd raise his voice at his wife, then he'd feel immense guilt, then he'd feel immense resentment for the job, for working, for taking this over, and he was a shell of himself, completely consumed, and the only way he knew to attempt to solve this problem was he would spend more time in the office. If he could just get the restaurant to this level, then he could hire somebody else, then he could step away, and then he could put an exit plan in place. The answer was always do more, work more, do more, work more. He was there already 6 days a week. How much more could he really do? And even worse was when he finally would get his children to bed, he was exhausted. He had no energy, no attention span left to connect with his wife. So he'd dissociate. He'd doom scroll. Or even worse, he'd worry. He'd open up his email. He'd open up scheduling with his employees. He'd open up payroll services. He was always tinkering, always doing, unable to shut off. And he was living this way for a very long period of time. And when we first began working together, we instilled two non-negotiables. And there's one here in particular I think you're going to love if you relate to this story. First one, very simple. He had completely gotten away from an exercise regimen. So we mandated 3 workouts a week. Look, if he had the money to invest in coaching, he had the money that he told me he was bringing in, he absolutely had the money to outsource his exercise. He hired a personal trainer to really capitalize on the added accountability. So we got 3 workouts per week in place, which did wonders for his emotional, mental, and physical well-being. Second to that, the moment he parked his car in his driveway, and we put a sticky note on his dashboard to make it a very easy thing to do, we did 5 minutes of breath work. So he could physically, emotionally release any of the pain, the frustration, the stresses and struggles of the workday before he entered his house. He could take the time to reset, focus on the husband and father he wanted to be, find a moment of calm, and then walk inside. And that little habit alone completely altered the trajectory of who he was becoming as a father, did wonders for his relationship, his communication with his wife. And we continued to build off that, making subtle changes, and of course, doing the deep identity level work. Why did he feel the need to prove himself, to take over this restaurant? Why did he feel he couldn't say no and walk away from this for fear of upsetting his parents? He would feel guilty. We worked through all of that. But most importantly, we created a sense of safety, coming home to himself, being who he is, expressing what he wants, slowing down. And just a quick pause for a moment. You know, if you're listening to this and you're a founder, an executive, a leader, an owner, and everything I've shared is speaking to you, you feel you've been silently drowning in pressure, anxiety, overwhelm, let me remind you that you're not alone. And that this is the exact work I do with my clients, helping them who, again, these people on paper, immense success, but helping them internally remove that friction and execute at the levels they're capable of from a place of joy, peace, clarity, and fulfillment. Not a place of urgency, have to, need to. And if you're ready to learn to find safety in slowing down, safety in leveling up, then I invite you to use the link in the show notes to apply for one-on-one private coaching. One of the last key points I want to make sure that you walk away from this episode with is that successful, high-performing individuals who have learned and prioritized regulating their nervous system, their ability to sit with emotions, to process and move forward, just like you, they're still emotional beings. They still feel stress, frustration, anger, pressure. The difference is that they've trained themselves to recover before these emotions have hijacked their behavior. And there's two incredibly powerful and very recent examples. Past couple of guests on this podcast, Brandon Epstein and Ryan Pineda. They both openly talked about whether it be systems, boundaries, intentional limitations, what they've done to help them better regulate and reset their nervous system. I mean, take Brandon, for example. Brandon spent a significant chunk of time in the hustle and bustle of Miami. I mean, enough said. It is always on in Miami. Things are moving a million miles an hour. And he moved completely out of Miami, completely out of the country to the remote jungle of Colombia, to reconnect with nature, to slow down and better protect his energy and his peace. Ryan openly talked about how he works roughly 30 hours a week. This is the man who owns multiple, I believe it was seven-figure businesses. And he works 30 hours a week. He prioritizes self-care in the morning, time with his family, time to do what he loves, which is golf. These two incredibly successful operators have learned the importance of doing what's necessary to keep them clear, composed, grounded, and able to access the highest version of themselves. Why aren't you? You know, there's a very simple formula for growth. Growth in this case meaning, leveling up, expanding to the next level, growing your impact, growing your income. And that formula, shout out to Brad Stulberg, this is where I got this, is stress plus rest. Yet you're so focused on only the stress variable. You think if you add more stress, if you can navigate more stress, that's what's going to help you grow. Maybe in the short term, 100%. Intentional intensity is necessary for transformative growth. I've spoken about that at length in previous episodes. Yet that rest component is what allows you to sustain the significant success you achieve. You need the rest part. The rest allows you to reset, which allows you to regulate, which allows you to recharge. So let me share some of the common warning signs that you have overly focused on just the stress aspect of the growth equation. You wake up exhausted despite sleeping 10, 11, 12 hours on a Saturday night, Sunday morning. You find yourself stuck in a pattern of snapping at your children or your spouse. Lately, you found it difficult to focus. You have mini anxiety or panic attacks. You dread certain meetings or days of the week. You're constantly checking your phone. Perhaps one of the lowest hanging fruit, big red flags of awareness is that you need alcohol, food, drugs, or social media to decompress. Something at the end of the day to take the edge off or help you sleep. It's a big red flag. That's not normal. Or if it is normal in your environment, it's time to audit your environment. Imagine for a moment starting your day without this compulsion to grab your phone. Creating a sense of gratitude, peace, and presence. Imagine being able to clearly articulate what it is you're feeling and why you might be feeling that way. Imagine finding great ease, becoming aware of your breathing patterns, how deep, how shallow, through your nose or through your mouth, and finding ease, catching yourself when the stakes have gotten higher or your intensity is increased unnecessarily, and being able to take a few rapid reset breaths. Imagine looking forward to a moment or period of rest and coming away not feeling anxious and guilty, but feeling recharged, at peace. Imagine starting a small task and seeing it through without switching to something else. Imagine going to bed and having your head hit the pillow with a sense of calm, pride, and accomplishment, not immediately overwhelmed by the worry of tomorrow. You have to stop treating exhaustion as a badge of honor. Locked into that fighter's flight, always on, going, will not get you to the next level and will not help you sustain the current level of success that you have. And as you've listened to this episode today, there may be a part of you that associates slowing down to reset and regulate your nervous system with laziness, softness, complacency, or even losing your edge. Let me remind you, this couldn't be further from the truth. The ability to stay calm, grounded, clear, composed under pressure, it's not weakness. It's one of the highest forms of strength. Anybody can function when things are easy. Elite performers maintain self-control, clarity, and composure when the pressure rises and stakes are at the highest. And that's because of their ability to regulate their nervous system. And if there's one thing I want you to take from this episode today, it's this. Your next level is not going to come from forcing more, doing more, grinding harder, or staying constantly wired and on. At some point, sustainable next level success requires regulation. It requires the ability to slow down without guilt or anxiety, the ability to sit with and process emotions, and the ability to remain clear, grounded, and intentional. The goal is to build a nervous system that feels safe leveling up, safe navigating the inevitable, the expected and unexpected challenges and obstacles of growth. So if you're listening to this episode and you're realizing that you've spent years operating in survival mode, constantly wired, constantly carrying pressure, unable to shut your mind off, you're not broken. But your nervous system has likely adapted to a state of chronic protection. And that's exactly the kind of work I help high performers unwind and rewire. So if you're ready to thrive, I invite you to use the link in the show notes to apply for one-on-one private coaching. I hope you found today's conversation thought-provoking and valuable. My goal in every one of these conversations is to help you get unstuck so that you can lock in, level up, and achieve your potential. And my one ask is that you simply share this conversation. Share this with the high performer you know who's always on, bragging about how much they're working. They're the person who needs to hear it most. And if you haven't done so already, taking 30 seconds to leave a genuine rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to today's show, it goes a long way in supporting the show. It's greatly appreciated. So thank you for doing that. Thank you again for listening. Have a fantastic start to your week, and I'll catch you in Thursday's episode.